Hello everybody, welcome to another installment of Sessions. In this segment, the photo finish, I would like to talk to you about a part of the elements of visual design titled framing. Now in visual design and the structure of creating your composition, there's different elements. There's about 7 of them, and then in those there's sometimes some sub-elements. Anyway, there's a lot of different things that we'll touch upon as we get into it later on also. But this one here, framing, is one that is seldom either talked about or explained or promoted. And I think it's a very important one. So in the elements of design, you have line, shape, texture, color, all kinds, shade, all kinds of different things that you can add to bring and visual attention to the viewer of your photograph or your art piece, to hold it to your subject or lead the eye. And these are very important, and they're not rules. They're guidelines in a sense to be able to bring structure to your image, and to me that's very important. You know, although we're free to create the way we want to create, although we want to do whatever we want to do, this is a little bit more in the sense of just designing your composition that the viewer will feel comfortable in the sense of looking at your photograph or understanding the message or led to the subject. And to me, this is extremely important. So framing, I always look for it. I'm always on the lookout for that because to me, what it does, the only way I can describe it is it brings visual weight right down to your subject, and it subconsciously holds the eye where you need it to go. So the subject or the message or wherever you want the eye to be led stays, and it brings impact or visual impact to your subject. So let me share some images with you, and I'll explain as we go along on how what I'm talking about, and show you a bunch of different examples. All right, so here we go. So for an example, if you look at this photograph, it's a simple photograph. So when I made it, I was traveling. I was in Haiti in this case. This is in Haiti. And we had a break day off. So I was walking around the beach, and suddenly I saw this boat. It's a simple photograph. It's nothing spectacular. But I noticed that the sky, the boat, you know, it was kind of not much happening in the sense of action or something going on in the sky. So I started looking around to add some depth, add some dynamic in the sense of bringing down the eye and holding it, framing my subject. So basically I found a tree. I saw a tree behind me, and I just went underneath the tree, sat down on the ground, and actually shot up in order to add the leaves of the tree to give me kind of a framing that kind of holds your attention. If this wasn't there, of course it would be a picture of a boat like it is right now, but also what you see, what you would see is just sky. So where does the eye go? Where does it go? There's nothing stopping the eye from going out in a sense of out of the photograph. So it holds you in, and it holds you with the subject. So that, to me, framing is very important. On another side here, very simple again photograph. I'm a big fan of architecture, so I'm always looking at buildings. And if you look at these two pillars, these two lines against a white background and this little light post, I was very fortunate that the light matched the colors actually, and the black matched the pole, etc. But these two hard, solid lines are holding the viewer's attention inside the frame to let the subject shine in a sense, or to just be by itself but bring visual attention to it. Again, same idea. It doesn't always have to be straight lines or anything like that, but walking around on the streets, I do a lot of street photography, and if you notice, I was able to use the power lines as a shape, as a form of in the sense of triangle, if you want to look at it that way, to just hold your attention against this big blue, vast white blue sky. I mean, and again, of course, you can see that the subject is coming out by itself, the sneakers, but having those lines there, and I worked at it. I walked around, I did different angles, I tried different things to give me this sense of framing, to bring your attention and hold it exactly where it needs to be. Now, this particular photograph, same idea as in Brooklyn, New York, and to me, it was very important to have the Empire State Building in there. And if I would have done the photograph, which I did normally, which you can see all the detail in the buildings and all that, what happens is the sky gets washed out, and I couldn't see the Empire State Building. So by silhouetting, taking an exposure on the sky, giving me detail, I don't know if you can see, but there's some detail. It's an overcast day. It's kind of a rainy type of day, but you can see a little bit of the blue of the sky here. So by exposing and taking, and all I did was point my camera straight up at the sky and took an exposure reading on the sky, which silhouetted the buildings and the bridge. But also what it did is it gave me the shape of the Empire State Building here, and using the structure, the pillars of the bridge, to frame the smallest part of the scene. So your attention will go there, and your attention visually will remain there, and it will tell me my story on the Empire State Building. So this is what I'm talking about when it comes to framing, and you're using whatever's there to help you give attention again, and I'm going to repeat that quite often. So here again, this is in Africa, and we stopped for some fuel, and here comes this bus, and I saw it leaving. It's actually driving right now. So if you look at the composition here again, I've divided my frame into two squares, a rectangle actually, you can see it here, and a smaller one here were all the people. Now I chose to go very tight, very near the photograph, because what I was able to do was eliminate the top of the bus, the sky, etc., all kinds of other distractions, and this strong line of the roof of the bus, in a sense, worked as my framing, and you can see exactly what happens here. So it brings attention to the people. It brings the visual weight and holds it to where it needs to be. Same idea here. For those who know me know that I love to photograph transportation and buses and subways and all kinds of stuff like that. Whenever I go to a big city, I love to get lost on buses and subways, and I just document and do different things. But in this particular case, this is in Colombia, in Bogota, and the bus is actually turning a corner and driving. And this young lady in the bus just so happened that she looked straight at me, and that was my moment to actually release the shutter and take the photograph. But as you can tell, here we go again. Here's this big black square, or sorry, the smallest one actually out of the whole composition, and there she is framed, and your attention will go there. So if you look at this photograph as a whole, if we break it down, you have somewhat of a square here, rectangle here, another square, a big square here, rectangle here, and another one here, and then this one. But the only shape that's different into this photograph is the oval of her face, put into the black section, which is inside of the bus. You have no choice but to see that face. You have no choice but to look at her eyes. And she is looking directly. I was very fortunate. She looked right into my lens as the bus is going by. So I was very lucky on that point. So this is what I'm talking about now. This is not something that I can always control. It's something that through training, through working, through photographing, I'm very aware of when I see it, when it's there and when it works, and I just shoot. Self-explanatory here. Again, in Africa, and same idea. You've got all this frame of a window, and then all of a sudden this young boy came and put his hand right here, as you can see, and started looking at me. And he was just very silent and just looking. And although I didn't have to direct him, I didn't have to move anything, I just needed to be ready to make the photograph when I saw what was happening here. And he was in a perfect little situation here. He was in the perfect place, and he was framed, of course, by those are steel bars, so from the steel of the window, the glassless window, and it frames his face or his eyes directly at the viewer. You know, and again, here we go again, a silhouette of a construction building, and same idea. The gentlemen, the construction workers, are so small into the photograph, but by being able to use that and one of the windows as a frame, I actually waited for them to walk around and pass by, because there was a part that they were, let's say, one guy, half of his body would have been in the black, etc. I wouldn't have been able to do it. So I actually had to wait for a little bit until they started working and they were moving and talking, and they started moving here. And once they were in my window, where I could really frame them with that little window, and although they are the smallest part of the scene, you are actually have no choice but to go see or spend time with them. And that's the idea behind framing. It just adds weight. Havana, Cuba, same idea. Using shadow here, just like the other photograph, I'm using shadow. And when I'm walking around the streets of Havana, I noticed this. I noticed this kind of thing. So all of a sudden, I noticed that this beautiful shadow was creating this V that acted, you know, like a frame again. And population of Havana is pretty large. So it was just a matter of time. So I spent probably, I'm going to say, about 25 minutes, maybe half an hour at that spot. And I've got all kinds of different people coming through, just passing through the photograph, just coming. Sometimes there's 2 people, sometimes there was 3, but I just found that in this particular case, one single person was the winner shot for me. And by underexposing the photograph a little bit, but actually exposing for the light, underexposed the whole thing, and it gave me a really perfect silhouette framed by dark shadows. So this, again, take your time, look and see what's happening. In Haiti, in a place called Jacmel in Haiti, you can see the big fence, and it's creating a square right here, and then of course another one here, or a rectangle I should say, sorry, and then another one here. Now here I had to be fast. Again, we were stopped for fuel and a little bite to eat because we were on a really pretty heavy trip, a big travel. And then as everything was being done with my trucks and all this stuff, and we were, I saw these 2 little girls, and I started playing with them and playing hide and seek, and it's really fun to engage kids. But suddenly they vanished from me, and I didn't know where they were. And suddenly I kind of looked around the corner, and there they were, looking at me. I had to be ready. I had to be prepared, and I got the one shot, because as soon as they saw me, they started giggling and they went back in and they hid. They went somewhere else. So we kind of played. So seeing, in a sense of being able to bring visual attention to your subject, framing your subject is critical in my opinion. And you can really start doing some interesting things to really make the subject stand out, even if it's the smallest part of the scene. And you can have a lot of fun with it, but it's all about training your eye, seeing. Again, self-explanatory here, but this photograph, it's in New Brunswick, my home province, and I'm just walking around in a wharf, and I saw this boat in the fog. So my assignment was to photograph and do a project on this boat for the fishery industry. And so I was walking around trying to figure out what to do here. And I needed to have something, because although I have the photograph of the boat close up inside, I have all kinds of people working on it, the fishermen and all that stuff. I just wanted something a little bit different. And to do that, I needed to include something. But I couldn't find another blue boat. So believe it or not, that shot took me almost an hour to make, although it looks like a snapshot, and it is. But I found the right colored boat. I needed something blue. If I would have had something yellow, red, even white, there's no way, because this is so much bigger. This part here is so much bigger than this part, that if this was, for an example, yellow, bright yellow, this is where your attention would go. So by having the same color, I had to search. it blends. It just kind of goes in. So it's not just click. It's not just seeing a boat and going click. But also what was important is when I found the boat, I was able to, boats are tied to the wharf. So I had to look around and wait and change my angles and do different things. And I was able to use the rope that was holding the boat in place to frame, again, the smallest part of the scene. So this is visual work. You have to take your time, you have to observe, and it's not coming home like that day. I didn't come home with 2,000 pictures. I just came out with the pictures that I needed, a few extra copies, etc. But I spent more time looking, seeing, composing, designing than I do pressing the shutter. I think is very important. Again, when I photograph and I walk around, I see things, as you can see here, same idea. I've got the sand or the mud of the low tide framing the bird into my composition. This is in Ottawa, and walking around again on the streets, I saw this church, and I was able to lift myself up from the other side of the street because I'm a big fan of clouds. And the sky was really dramatic that day, and I was able to lift myself up on another building across the street, so I would be fairly high in a sense of being able to have that same plane of view, in a sense, if you will. My lens was parallel to the steeples, so I wasn't shooting like this. I was shooting straight, so the lens was very parallel to both steeples. And of course the statue here on the roof is again the smallest part of the scene, and the two steeples here are completely framing my subject. So your attention stays in the center, in the middle of the photograph. Street photography is a big thing for me, so wherever I am, wherever I go, this is a big thing that I love to do. And same idea. So when I travel, I just see things. And then suddenly I noticed this map. And a lot of people are walking about and just hanging around. So this to me was a perfect square as a perfect frame. So my hope was that eventually somebody, a tourist, I don't care, would stop and look at the downtown map of St. John, New Brunswick. And all of a sudden this gentleman came in and bang, he stopped dead center. I couldn't have planned this any better, but I had to stop. I had to wait for something to happen. And don't get me wrong, many times I stop, I wait, I want to see what's going on and nothing happens. I move on. But I always give it time for the possibility of something may happen. And in this particular case, it took about 10 minutes, 15 minutes before somebody stopped and looked, but it was worth the time for me because I was able to frame the subject. Exact same thing here. In New York, same idea, and very early in the morning, and this gentleman was coming into work, and I was in the back, back roads of the city, if you will, and all of a sudden I saw him coming in, and he's walking. I have him coming in, I have him walking, coming towards me, but I thought eventually he's going to go into one of those doors, and that was the door that he went into. And it was just a perfect situation for me to get him to release the shutter when he's coming through the door. So the door entrance acts as a frame. If you look, everything is in the bluish colors and all this stuff, and here we got some brown, so it makes him stand out completely from where it is. And again, this is not something that I can plan. This is not something that I can set up. This is not something that I can just prepare. This is something that a lot of times I have to see it before it happens, and I have to be spontaneous, but more importantly, I have to be very ready. Self-explanatory here in Haiti. All of a sudden, we are working in a hospital, and I'm photographing and I'm doing different things. And suddenly I saw this woman come out of the bus, and I just went, it can't be. She's matching the wall of the hospital. And I was hoping and hoping that she would come in this direction, and so she did. She went up the ramp here, turned around, and I was ready. And as soon as she passed into the doorway, bang, I was ready to photograph. And a lot of these shots, you just have one chance at it. Same idea here. Now you can see what I'm talking about. And a lot of times, I just keep going. But a lot of times when I see these things, I stop and I make photograph. Here again, just like the previous photographs with shadows, in Havana, this is in Namibia, in Africa, I'm using shadows to give me that line to frame the smallest part of the scene, which is the tree. Same idea. So you can have a lot of fun with framing. One of my favorite buildings is the Chrysler Building in New York, and I have hundreds of photographs in all the trips I did to New York. Every time I go, I spend one day photographing that building. And this one here, I was walking down the street, it reminded me of an old Woody Allen movie or something like that. Like, I don't know, it's just an old movie, and the drama of the whole thing. So I actually walked around and just placed myself to put this light underneath to frame and bring your attention back. So although the building is pointing your eye to be led out, this big ball, which we know it's a light, is stopping it and just letting it bang, come right back down. So it holds you right in. These two photographs are exactly the same composition. One is in Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia. The other one is in Africa, South Africa. And look at the arms of this woman here, starting from the top, going all the way down and leading you out. Look at this photograph here, right? Same composition, exact same thing right here, holding you into the boats, holding you into her pretty little face. Okay, so again, you know, it doesn't matter when, where you are, what you're doing. Look, see, prepare. I had to work at this photograph really hard. Lens selection was important, etc., to compress the image, to use the pillars to frame my subject. Same idea. Okay. Wide angle lens here, and I was able to distort the image by shooting up and distorting. So my subject is like this, but my lens is like this. So I'm distorting, I'm compressing the image to have these strong lines of the two buildings concaving or towards the tower to hold you in there, to hold the visual weight. So this photograph, as you can see, the bamboo of the hut is framing the two boys, and they're staring at me, etc. The next photograph, they're made about probably 10-15 years apart. So this one is in Africa, this one is in Moncton, New Brunswick, but it's the same composition. Look at these lines of pillars. I'm using pillars here to do this portrait of this young man. So again, don't be afraid to use the elements that are around you to be able to photograph, but bring attention to your subject. I'm a big fan of contrast. I work with shadows. I do all kinds of different things like that, and it's a lot of fun. I work with a lot of artists also, and I use actually their paintings to build a set, to design framing. So here I have one of her paintings in the background and two of her paintings on the side here. And as you can see, I tilted them a little bit, and because they became black lines with some texture, and it represents or replicates the work that she's doing in her exhibit. And I was able to use the work, in a sense, to frame her, because all of a sudden I'm working in somebody's studio, and it's a real different place for me to be. So I have to use what I have at hand to design the photograph, to bring it to where it will be. Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, same idea. I love to photograph in the rain. As a matter of fact, I did a whole exhibit of 2 years of work of photographing in the rain, called Watercolor in the Rain. And this was part of it. It didn't make the exhibit, but it was part of one of my photographs. And as you can tell, again, trees. So I was walking around, I was going to different directions. I was placing myself, standing up, crouching down, just looking. And yes, I got soaking wet. And yes, it was not comfortable, but I got my shot. And I wanted to create drama from this old building, and it's a double exposure to get the green in there from the grass, to give me that look, that feel of water. Even if you're abstracting and you're doing different things, if you notice here, look at these lines. Okay, so this is camera movement, and I'm moving my camera up very swiftly. I'm just moving it up. But look at the lines. It's an underpass type of bridge, railroad bridge, and you can see all the lines coming in, framing my subject as it's walking by. Right? Of course, Statue of Liberty, pretty simple. The next photograph is the same subject done on the same day at the same time. But notice here, the sky to me was a little boring, and I was very fortunate that all of a sudden there's this white line. We know it's a cloud, and here we go again. So she's pointing straight up. Her arm is going up. Bang. The line stops you from your eye leading out of the photograph. What it does is it leads you back in because it has no other place to go. You're in this particular square. You have no choice but to see it. The next photograph, the Statue of Liberty, is also very small, but I'm using trees like the very first photograph I showed you, which was of that boat in Haiti. I'm using trees again. So here we go again. As you can tell, this is later in the day. The weather changed a little bit, and the sky is not as dramatic. And I just found it boring because I was so far away. And so I was able to go underneath a tree. I went underneath a tree and I used the branches and the leaves of the tree to frame my subject. And again, as I mentioned, I love working with silhouettes, working with different things that contrast to bring attention. And these two young men at the wharf, we were waiting for our boat to go on an island, and all of a sudden I was just hanging out, and I saw that boat in the background, but again, small, not much going on, and I saw these two young men hanging out, and I just went right in front of them, did an exposure to create the silhouettes, and lead you into and hold you into the smallest part, which is the subject, which is the boat, with these two dramatic figures in front of it. And Vancouver here, the aquarium. I love this type of thing when I go traveling and visiting different places, and I just love this kind of idea. So here I'm using a circle to frame my subject, to let you know. And if you look, the jellyfish are the only thing basically of color, minus the blue. But so your attention will go there. And the two shapes, of course, we know they're two young people photographing and just having fun and enjoying the day. So I'm able to take an exposure on the brightness, take an exposure on the bright part of the scene, which is this blue here, to create a dark silhouette of shapes framed by the circle, and it gives me my story. It tells me exactly what's going on, including here where I used the sun, shallow depth of field, the sun's going down, and when you photograph and focus on something very close with a bright light behind you, and with shallow depth of field, when you're because everything goes out of focus in the background, anything that's a bright light or a ball of light will expand. So I was able to do that in this particular case. This shot, believe it or not, was made in 1988-89 on film, Kodachrome 64 film, going back here, and with a 300 millimeter lens, and with shallow depth of field I was able to blow up, if you will, the sun in the background. So that will conclude my little expose, if you will, on framing and visual design. I think it's a very important part of it. Keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for things like that: lines, shapes, texture, shadows, contrast, all kinds of different things, and you'll see a huge difference in your photographs. And if you look at the photograph on this particular page right here, you can see the gentleman in the subway in Montreal, and he's just leaning there, and I'm waiting for my train, and I was able to capture him in the doorway to highlight him as another person waiting for the train, just like I was. So with that said, please follow us on Facebook or on YouTube at Sessions with Maurice Henri. Subscribe, like us. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. So don't hesitate. All right? So take care. We'll see you on the next time.